They were trying to set him up. But he doesn't bow to it. Very patiently, he deals with the situation. When they're all gone, he speaks to the woman, go and sin no more. He deals with it as he should. We should respond to pressure on God's terms, in terms of what he tells us to do here. In terms of the principles we read in the Bible and the examples we have, John 8 being one of those. But also on our own terms, in terms of the convictions that we have in our relationship with God that tell us that we're to treat all people fairly, with a spirit of righteousness and love and compassion. But yes, to rebuke that which is sinful, but still not to do it out of a hateful, spiteful spirit. So we respond to pressure on God's terms, how God tells us to, by the convictions that we have based on what God tells us, and not from the intimidation that we receive from those who are trying to pressure us to go down a road. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced a burning fiery furnace, 7 times hotter than normal, the text says. Nebuchadnezzar was going to heat it up, and he did. But their answer to him, you remember it, these 3, we think, young men said to him, we have no need to answer you in this matter. God is going to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down. In other words, pressure us all you want to, Nebuchadnezzar. We know that God will deliver us. He doesn't want us to bow down to your image, and we're not going to do it. But even if he doesn't do that, our own code of morality and righteous living forbids us to fall down to your image. We're not going to do it, period. That's the kind of response to pressure that godly people must always try their very best to model. Not allowing the pressures of the world or pressures of those around us to shove us down a road that we know is wrong and that we know is against the will of God. And so responding to that pressure, we respond to it as God would have us to and not as man would have us to. Let's look at John 18. John 18. We'll actually read some of this context. Won't read all of it. Beginning in verse 28, then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. It was early morning, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? They answered and said to him, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. Then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, are you king of the Jews? Jesus answered to him, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and your chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom's not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews, but now my kingdom is not from here. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I'm a king. For this cause I was born, for this cause I've come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. Then Pilate said to him, what is truth? When he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said, I find no fault in him at all. If you read the rest of the text, Pilate gives in. He even goes against the advice of his wife, Matthew 27:19. She comes to him and she says, have nothing to do with this just man. I've suffered many things today in a dream because of him. Pilate even washes his hands, but he still capitulates. Why? Because he's a man under pressure. He's a man who caves to the pressure of hatred and anger and mob rule. And maybe out of some fear in his own heart of creating a bigger stir if he doesn't grant their request, or not just their request, their demand. So he caves to this pressure. By contrast, we see Esther in Esther 4:16, when the plot that she learned through Mordecai of Haman to destroy all the Jews came before her. It was against the law of the Medes and Persians for anyone to go in before King Ahasuerus without being invited, and yet she takes that chance. She's a person under pressure because she doesn't want to see her people destroyed, and yet she knows if she goes in and violates this law, she could very well lose her life. And Mordecai even says, do you think he's going to spare you when he finds out you're a Jew? That's the essence of what the text says. And so she says, you pray for me. You have those folks who are my support group fast and pray for me. And she says, I'm going to go even though it's against the law, and if I perish, I perish. In other words, this is what's right, and I'm going to do it even if it means my own demise. That's a response to pressure that a godly woman exercised in her life. And it's the same kind of thing that should come from us when we face pressure in our modern world. It's possible to feel pressure from above, that is, from our superiors or even from God Himself. Someone says, well, how can you feel pressure from God? Well, God says, here are a list of behaviors I expect from you, and you'll be called into account on the day of judgment to give an answer for them. And some of those behaviors are not easy to model. Some of them are a challenge for some folks, and yet they realize they're going to give an answer to God if they don't do these things. They're going to give an answer if they do, so they'd better do them. Sometimes that's pressure. Sometimes pressure comes from within. We have a standard of behavior or ethic on our own, and we say, I expect this of myself. And so the pressure is internal. Sometimes it's from followers and associates. Sometimes it's from people in our own family, from people in the congregations where we serve, if those are of us who are serving as elders or deacons, those who are doing that. Sometimes the pressure is from expectations, maybe from the past. You go into a certain job or a certain task, and you know that someone of notoriety has done that task before, and they've done it at a high level, and now the pressure's on you to rise to the highest or the same high level of performance. If you don't believe that exists in the church, sit down and talk to a preacher sometime who has followed a preacher who has had a wonderfully successful, loving, accepting tenure in a place for 10, 20, 30 years and have the next guy come in. In some people's minds, he's like Judas Iscariot. There's no way he can live up to the person that he follows. Sometimes that pressure comes from those expectations. Sometimes it's from deadlines. Everybody in here has been in a job or a situation where you have faced a deadline. If you're a preacher, your deadline's every Sunday. And on Sunday night, when you're finished, here comes next Sunday. You have another deadline. That places pressure on us. When we were in school, some of us didn't study until the night before the final exam. That's pressure. I had a roommate one time who had 4 final exams in one day. He didn't study at all until the night before, and he took a whole packet of no-dos. At 2:30 in the morning, I woke up in the dorm room, looked over at him, and he was frozen at his desk with his eyes just staring. I spoke to him 2 or 3 times. He never moved. It was the no-dos, but it was also the pressure. No, he survived. I thought that night he was going to literally pass, Bob. I assumed that he did, but man, think about that pressure. It's there. It's palpable. It's real. Sometimes variables beyond our control. You find yourself sometimes in a job and you're partnered up with someone else with whom you do that job as a team, and let's say that person has a sickness in their family or they get sick themselves and they have to be out, and then all of a sudden every single thing that both of you did is on you. And performance better not lag because there are certain things that have to be done, and now they're not 2 mules pulling the wagon, they're just one. Variables that you can't control. And sometimes, as with Jesus, your pressure comes from those who are against you. Your opponents, your adversaries. The one adversary as a roaring lion who is seeking to undo you and devour you. So pressure can come from a number of different avenues. And again, it's real. It's not just assumed or imagined. When leaders cave to pressure, when we cave and give in, it sets a precedent. Our followers see it. Sometimes our opponents see it. And all of a sudden, certain questions come to bear. What made them cave to the pressure? Was it money? Was it something else? What made them cave, and will they cave again if the same kind of pressure is put on them? And if they caved, how much pressure needs to be applied again for them to cave again, or how much can they stand? If you don't believe this is real, then have a 2-year-old, or a 3-year-old, or a 4-year-old, or up to an 18-year-old. And they put pressure on you for some reason, whatever it is. Some silly demand or stomping their feet and throwing a temper tantrum, and you give in. You cave to the pressure. Don't tell me that that young person doesn't remember that. If they are a sponge, and they are, they'll remember, you know, I did this, and that caused them to give me what I wanted. So all I have to do is what? Do the same thing again, and I'll get what I want. Whatever the results are, whether it's timeout or spanking or rewarding the behavior, that young person, and I don't mean to badger them, but it's a great example, they're going to remember it. They're going to remember if they pitched a fit, if you took off your belt and lit them up for it. But they're also going to remember if they pitched a fit and you gave in and gave them exactly what they wanted just so they'd be quiet. Parents have pressure because they're leaders. In Matthew 4, Jesus had just completed a very pressured situation. Satan tempted him 3 times. Parallel passage is Luke 4. He has successfully endured the temptations. He said no to all 3. His answer was the same. It is written. He responded with the Word of God, which is exactly what he should have done. And then in Matthew 4:11, the text says, Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. Keep that thought in mind. Let's look at Luke 22. It's also on the screen. Luke 22. Now he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Luke 22, beginning in verse 39. Coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives, as he was accustomed, and his disciples also followed him. When he came to the place, he said to them, Pray that you may not enter into temptation. He was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if it is your will, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Look at this, verse 43. Just like Matthew 4. Then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then his sweats became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. As you may know, you may have studied this before, heard others teach about it, physicians talk about a condition called hematidrosis, where under extreme pressure, the capillaries, this is a very vascular area the head is anyway, capillaries can burst, actually sending forth blood from the scalp, from the forehead area. If that's true, then it would explain what happened here. Or an analogy is being made that this sweat there was pressure. There was anxiety. He was in great distress. Not only, commentators have argued, because of what he was about to go through physically on the cross, but if he was about to taste death for every man, Hebrews 2:9, he was about to taste what it was like to have separation from God because of sin, if he indeed became the sin sacrifice for all of us. And if that second part of it's true, it's the first time in all eternity where Jesus, God the Son, would have been separated from God the Father. Either way, pressure. But notice what happens. An angel comes and ministers to him. I don't recall any time in my life, and probably you don't either, when we were under some great period of stress or pressure, duress, and a literal angel came and ministered to us as they did to Jesus. But still, there is help, there is encouragement, there is strengthening for us when we face those times of pressure. And we enjoy the potential of that. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in just a second. What are some of the things a leader can do to help deal with pressure? Well, there are some things. Number one, accept it and embrace it. Not embrace it from the standpoint of going, man, I hope today they push me to the wall. But the idea of acceptance and saying, okay, this is what comes with the territory of being a leader and being a Christian, being someone who influences others for Christ. I'll accept that. And when it comes, I won't run from it. I won't be in denial about it. I'll just deal with it the best I can, which is what our Lord did. It's what Paul did. What the other apostles did who were jailed for their faith and lost their lives for their faith. They accepted it and embraced the idea that the path they had chosen, the straight and narrow, the difficult and narrow path, involves situations that bring tremendous pressure upon us as followers of Christ. Number two, have a support network in place. Jesus had a support network. He could go to his Father anytime and did. He had the 12 who were with him that he could ask at least this small group to go into the garden and watch with him. Though they slept through it, he could still ask them to go. A support group like the Lord's church helps us in times of pressure. But you know what we have to do? We have to be open enough with our brothers and sisters to let each other know when we are going through this valley and that we are being pressured from different things in our lives, and we need their prayers, we need their love, we need their encouragement, we need a balm in Gilead, as the old hymn says. Some of us are too proud to do that. Some of us are too private to do that. And so we have to struggle with pressure on our own when we don't have to. The church has many purposes in our lives, and one of those is being that kind of support group. Number three, also viewing pressure in a positive light. Yes, he's really lost his mind now. No, hear me out. I started to bring a guitar with me this morning, and I decided that probably would not be a good idea for a whole lot of reasons, so I'll use an air guitar for the illustration. You take those 6 strings and you put them on that guitar and you tune them to E, B, G, D, A, and E from bottom to top. And you get them in tune. None of them are sharp, none of them are flat. What is that? It's pressure on the string because you're stretching it from the saddle down here, you're stretching it from the bridge up to this peg up here that you're turning, and it's tightening it. And sometimes you can hear it, and sometimes if you tighten it the wrong way, boing. But then if you get it tightened and you get it to the note where it's supposed to be, and then you apply more pressure, you put your fingers on this string at this point, and that string at that point, and that string at that point, and then you strum, you can actually get some pretty pleasant sounds. Well, what's a part of that? Pressure, stress, and pressure, but applied in the correct way. Perhaps instead of praying for deliverance from things that bring pressure to our lives, we should pray that God would help us make some sort of positive something out of that pressure, like an instrumentalist would on their instrument. When those forces in that instrument are stressed to their max, a person can stand up there, and when they're done, we stand up and clap, because they've done tremendous things with that pressure. Another one, of course, I've already mentioned, is Scripture and prayer. Scripture and prayer. I'd like to share an example with you. Some of you know the name on the screen, Dr. William Woodson, the late Dr. William Woodson. Dr. Woodson was here at least one time, I remember, for a seminar with Brother Tom Holland many years ago. Dr. Woodson was an instructor at Freed-Hardeman when I went there in the late 70s. Later on, he taught at David Lipscomb University and did many seminars and many different kinds of things. Brother Woodson was a brilliant man. His writings were just through the top brilliant. While he was, and he told us this story in one of our classes, so I don't have it third hand, came out of his mouth. He said there was a time when he was head of the Bible department at Freed-Hardeman that some great controversy was raging through the brotherhood. Don't know exactly what it was. He wasn't specific. But he said, brothers, let me tell you, it was a major thing. Brother Eclaw Gardner, who was president at that time, called him in and said, William, we're going to have to make a statement about this in terms of where the university stands on this issue so the brotherhood will know. It's up to you to devise, compile, and make that statement for our school. Brother Woodson said he felt like that Brother Gardner had just dumped a tandem load full of bricks on top of him when he left his office. And he said for the next several days, he couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, he couldn't do anything. he felt tremendous, tremendous pressure. Not that he was pressured to try to determine what was doctrinally right, but he said there was more to it than that. So finally, when he didn't know what else to do, and he was not getting any better, not getting any sleep, he just couldn't function, he got in the car and drove to Adamsville, Alabama, to see his mentor, Brother Franklin Camp. Brother Franklin Camp also had a tremendous reputation as a gospel preacher. Some of you recognize that name. Preached for many, 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 many years in the state of Alabama, and had the equivalent of GSOP right there at Adamsville, a Friday night training class out of which came many preachers and missionaries. Brother Franklin Camp, well known, and was the mentor of Dr. Woodson. Dr. Woodson said, I drove to his house. I didn't even tell him I was coming. There wasn't no thing as cell phones then, or email. He said, I just showed up. Knocked on his door. Brother Camp came to the door and said, William, what are you doing here? He said, can I come in and talk to you? He said, I have a burden on my heart, and I need to talk to you. So Brother Camp let him in. They went and sat down in the living room. Brother Woodson unburdened himself. He told him everything that was facing him, all the pressures he was facing, and asked for Brother Camp's advice. What would you do if you're in my shoes? Just poured himself out. He said Brother Camp sat there for a few minutes, and then he told him, he said, William, it was late evening. He said, William, take off your shoes and lie down on that couch. Brother Woodson said, I looked at him like he was a crazy man. He said, William, you have come here for my advice. Take off your shoes and lie down on the couch. So Dr. Woodson said, okay, what else could I do? He said, I did that. He said, and what Brother Camp did then, he opened his Bible and he just simply began to read the Psalms. Very calmly, very soothingly. He just began to read the Psalms. No commentary, no exposition, just reading it verse by verse. Brother Woodson said, I don't remember when I fell asleep. But again, it was the first time in several days. And he said, I slept like a baby on that couch. Woke up the next morning, sun was already up, and said, Brother Camp's still sitting there in his chair. He was asleep with his Bible still open, and he'd finished somewhere around Psalm 117. He read 117 Psalms to him. They both woke up, washed their faces, sat down, had a cup of coffee, and then he said, Brother Camp looked at him across the table, pointed his finger at him and said, William, go back to Henderson and do what's right, because that's what you were going to do anyway. Brother Woodson said, from then on, whenever I faced pressure or stress, he said, I just turned to Psalm 1 and start reading. And it always helped. This book has a lot of practical power for everyday living in it. This is one of the greatest examples I've ever heard of someone using it as a prescription for the pressures, the tremendous pressures that a brother in Christ was facing. Well, how does a leader avoid responding to pressure in the wrong sort of way? You have to have some pretty strong values. Jesus didn't go along, as we said at the beginning of this class, just kind of making up stuff as he went along. There were some strong values in him that would not allow him to cave to the pressure of his adversary, to the Jews, to Pilate, or anyone else. But there was also an unshakable determination to do what's right in every circumstance, in every case, regardless of how tremendous the pressure is felt. Let me ask a question. Is it ever right and proper to intentionally pressure a leader into doing something? As you think about that, I'll mention an illustration from 2 or 3 sessions ago about the congregation down in Alabama also that was having a problem with one of its elders, one of its 3 or 4 elders, who was an older man in his 80s, been an elder forever. He wanted a certain thing a certain way, and it was clear the other elders did not agree. The deacons did not see it this way, and the congregation understood that this one elder who was being stubborn and hard-headed was not on the right side of whatever issue it was. Everyone realized that he was wrong except him. And so the other elders resigned to dissolve the eldership and quote-unquote force him out. And once they did, an eldership was reappointed or appointed again. Those same three men who had been involved in this were again appointed as elders, but not this older man. I don't know how you feel about that. We probably don't have time to talk about that. There's some things about that that really give some misgivings in the heart. But again, evidently these other elders felt like this is the only way we can solve this. So is it ever right and proper to intentionally pressure a leader into doing something that you feel they need to do? And if so, could you cite an example, or could you defend your answer, whatever your answer is? The truth is, it's done. It's done. Okay, how so, Bob? Nathan also, as Bob has mentioned, Nathan exerted some pressure on David to do the right thing. Of course, evidently God had sent Nathan to him as a prophet of God, had sent Nathan to David to do that very thing. Nathan could have lost his life, couldn't he? David could have taken his life easily. But he had the courage to say, hey, tell you a story. He did. David said, that guy should die. Nathan said, you're the guy. That took a lot of courage. Sometimes it does take courage for us to stand up to someone who's clearly wrong in everyone's eyes except theirs. And to, I don't want to use the term exert pressure, but I guess that's a good term, to exert influence to the point to try to get them to see they're wrong or to get them to move in a different direction. Let's look at Judges 16. We're all familiar with Judges 16, but we will shift gears there for a moment. Sometimes pressure for someone who is a leader crosses gender lines. Of course, Samson, we understand who he is. If we begin reading let's begin reading in verse 15. She's already been after him a couple of times at least to disclose his strength, and he mocks her in that because he doesn't tell her the reason. Then she said to him in verse 15, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies. And it came to pass, now look at this, verse 16. Some of your versions may translate it different. This is the way the New King James says it. When she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death. Then he told her all his heart and said to her, no razor has ever come upon my head, for I've been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah saw that he'd told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up once more, for he's told me all his heart. So the lords of the Philistines came up to her, brought the money in their hand. She lulled him to sleep on her knees. She called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. Sometimes the exertion of pressure is gender related. It has been said by many preachers over the years, many of those who have taught and wrote about this circumstance, that David had strength except in one area. He couldn't tell a woman no. That females were his weakness, and Delilah was not the first one. How many times has this happened? How many times in the Lord's church has it happened where one person in a marriage might be a faithful Christian, the other one not, and the other one exert pressure on the other one across gender lines. Well, if you were a good wife to me, or if you were a good husband to me, then you wouldn't do this and this and this, or you would do this and this. I happen to know of a young couple, a young lady, member of the church, married a young man who's outside the church, and he pressured and pressured and pressured and pressured her until she gave in, and now she's with him. So it does happen. How many times have you heard of stories where young teenagers are out in a car in a dark place, even if they're Christians, members of the Lord's church, and pressure is exerted on one or the other for cooperation in a sexual union. And then all of a sudden one of them gets pregnant, and then they start talking divorce, or they start talking abortion, or a number of other things. Pressure can be exerted across gender lines. Why? I mean, think about Eve and Adam. She persuaded Adam to do what God had told him not to do. Why is there pressure across gender lines? Does one gender have that much power or influence over the other? You husbands, I better not see you shake your heads no like that, because you get some pressure when you get home, and vice versa. Yes, it does cross gender lines. Not only that, but it crosses age lines. We talk about, when people are young, peer pressure. What does peer pressure cause young people to do? Dress a certain way, right? Listen to a certain kind of music. Go out and engage in activities that they know, perhaps because of their upbringing, especially if their upbringing is in the Scriptures, that those activities are wrong. But they want to be accepted. You hear the word a lot. I just want to be accepted. I want to be liked by my friends. Is that only for the young? Or do adults have peer pressure? Is it just for those who are 17, 18, 19 years old? Come on now, folks. Some of you comment very regularly. Is peer pressure just for the young? Yes. Great point. Age lines as well. It can cross age lines. That's very true. How do we respond to peer pressure? Do we have peer pressure in the church? We ever felt pressured by our peers in the church to do a certain thing or behave a certain way, and we give in to that? You're all sleepy this morning, I can tell, or at least I put you to sleep, one of the two. Okay, final point of the day then, since we're in the final 5 minutes of class. Prolonged pressure can do things to people. That's why Jesus in Mark 6 took those disciples aside, his apostles aside, to have them rest a while. Because when you're in a pressure cooker situation all the time, or on a regular basis without some sort of relief, it can have an effect. Doctors have noted very clearly the effect of stress on the human body and on the mind and on the spirit. And so everyone needs a break. The Lord even knew that His disciples needed one here. We may be facing a situation of great pressure as leaders in our families or in the local congregation or in our jobs. There has to be a respite from that at a certain point. There has to be a place, maybe even in the middle of the pressure, we'll still feel it on the other side, but we take a break from it for a while to again become grounded as we try to work through and see the resolution of whatever situation it is to its very end. But that break is necessary because it's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. One of the blessed things about heaven is that there will be evidently no more stress and pressure in situations where we feel railroaded or where we feel the whole world crashing in on us, that we have to behave a certain way because someone else wants us to. Any other comments or questions this morning? Okay. Okay, Les has correctly observed that sometimes it's internal, and we need to be careful about how we place pressure on ourselves. Sometimes pressure can come from a congregation to an eldership. I've already mentioned a couple of examples. I want to mention one more as we conclude class. Suppose someone in a congregation is what would be described as a big giver. There are those in the church who give a lot of money. And by the way, this congregation as a whole is one of the most tremendously giving congregations in our brotherhood. And you're to be commended for that. Sometimes you have a scenario where someone is a big giver and they see the elders making a decision that they don't like. Whatever the decision is. Maybe just a judgment call, not anything doctrinal, it's just something we're not in favor of that. And so they either send a message to the elders or they go to the elders themselves and they say, if you do this, we'll withhold our contribution. That's nothing more than what you would call church blackmail. I want my way, and if you don't give me my way, I'll keep my money. Well, that person has a problem already between them and God in terms of their giving, and not just between them and the elders. But folks, that happens. And it's not just with money. You know, if you don't give me my way, I'll leave. Any number of things that can be used by anyone to exert pressure on an eldership if that eldership's doing something they don't agree with, but still can't find a reason why this particular thing is doctrinally wrong. Yes? No? Yes? Yes, ma'am. Peer pressure can be positive. It needs to be done in a loving, gentle manner, not this kind of manner, but you can nudge someone to do something, and if you nudge them enough, they might do it just to get you to hush, which is sometimes common in marriage. Thank you so much for your attention, your comments today. We are dismissed. And I'll probably pay for that last comment I just made. So.